To Disney, I think, there really wasn't a distinction between the story and the characters. The characters were the story, and vice versa.
What he tried to do in his pictures was to get definite personalities in the cartoon characters. And he said, without a definite personality, a character can't be believed.
I'm thumping. That's why they call me Thumper.
In Bambi, Walt wanted some poetry and some realism, and they hadn't done that. So he took his top animators, the top draftsmen from the studio, and even then he wasn't sure whether they could pull it off. And he left them alone for a while to do some test animation, and I remember Frank Thomas did the scene where Bambi's chasing the butterfly. And I also remember Milt Kahl did the scene where Bambi is trying to jump over a fallen tree and then flops on it, belly down.
You didn't hop far enough.
And those were the first scenes, the first pencil test that Walt saw.
And they showed their pieces of animation to Walt. Fear and trembling, because is it going to go or is it not going to go? These are the relationships that are going to make the movie.
And after the lights came up, Walt turned around and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, "That's pure gold, boys." And that's what Bambi became.
Walt was always wanting to push the envelope of what animation could do. In a film like Bambi, he's clearly pushing naturalism to a degree that no one has matched since in animation, and it's unlikely anyone ever will.
I think Walt picked his team for Bambi very, very carefully because he knew that this animation was going to be more difficult. It's not the cartoony type of animation that the animators had done, that there would be a lot of study involved, years of studying. So he picked Eric Larson and Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston and Milt Kahl as his key animators, and that was a good choice because they just dealt with those assignments really, really well.
They knew that what they were doing was not going to be easy. They knew that they didn't know what they were doing in the best sense of the word. And so they brought in the best teachers from Chenard Art Institute at the time and the best lecturers.
Walt was convinced that with a little training that we could put a lot of emotion and feeling into the animals without making them old cartoon type of animals, but realistic and convincing. I think he was right, but I don't think most of the men themselves at the studio thought so.
It was a big risk to do something like Bambi, and it was asking a lot from the animators to animate those kind of characters. Because when you look at the animals, and especially the deer that are in Snow White, they are so cartoony and simple and have really bodies like flour sacks.
It's a great exercise to put those back to back just a couple of years before, to look at Snow White and then look at Bambi and see the care and attention to detail that's given to the anatomy and the locomotion of the animals. And it's all done with a pencil on a piece of paper, and it's pretty amazing.
So this is one of the original model sheets that was actually used in the early 40s. This one has a date on it, the 23rd of May, 1940, when this was approved. And you can just see by the variety of poses and the thorough study of anatomy in these that this was something completely new.
We found ourselves in a place where they had stacked it with cages with all of the animals that would be in the picture, the skunks and rabbits.
We had live deer running around the studio, so they became somewhat pets.
And then they brought Rico Lebrun, who was a great artist for anatomy, and they had anatomy classes.
Just like you'd have a life class for a human figure, we had a life class of deer. But these were the structural things that we worked over and over, and he just drilled us and drilled us and drilled us to understand what the anatomy, what the bone structure of these little guys were.
They approached Bambi the way Leonardo da Vinci approached human beings. And that's why the animation is suddenly different. It isn't some artist remembering deer that he saw on a farm when he was a kid. It's some artist remembering the deer that he studied yesterday with a pad in his hand.
There was a story sketch artist, his name was Bernard Garbert, and he did beautiful drawings of deer. But Bernard Garbert had a very nice, simple way of getting a fluid feel into the drawings, and they started to move. They still didn't look like deer that could talk and would have human expressions, but he really simplified the deer body. And then Mark Davis came in, And he was able to really put human expressions and human attitudes onto a deer body. So that was really a breakthrough.
When Mark Davis was working on the designs, he studied expressions, particularly in babies, and applied some of that knowledge to the designs of the animals.
I was going through a book on child psychology, and these are all based, every face is based on the expression of human babies interpreted into the head of a young deer.
And then the great Milt Kahl came in and looked at everything and then boiled it down to something that would be right for the film, that could be animated, and that would just feel right.
We came as close as we figured we possibly could to the real deer and still be able to articulate for dialogue and and have a full range of expressions.
Go on, say hello.
Hello.
I think that influenced animators, you know, for decades, up even to today, because when you have a story that you want to portray a world and make that world very, very believable, you know, and that world is a natural world, inevitably you always look at Bambi as one of the great examples of that.
When you look at, say, Ollie Johnston's animation of Thumper.
It's delicious. Why don't you try some?
I did stuff where Thumper tells him, no, don't eat that green stuff.
Just eat the blossoms. That's the good stuff.
Thumper, what did your father tell you?
About what?
He is so much like a little boy who's gotten his hand caught in the cookie jar, and it's in the body language and the expressions.
Kind of wobbly, isn't he?
Thumper.
Well, he is.
Just because there are a bunch of pencil drawings going through these routines and giving these performances, to me, that was real.
In Frank Thomas's animation, he's very much known for his sincerity.
Frank Thomas came up with this great ice skating sequence with Thumper. All these wonderful gestures, this cocky little kid, when he raises his chest and wiggles his butt and says,
Watch what I can do!
At the time, I was trying to learn how to ice skate. And every time I'd come on a rink like this, you know, and go along very nervously, step by step, here'd be these other guys on their hockey skates. Oh, boy. I said, that's the way Thumper ought to be, you know, and Bambi ought to be like me, going along here. So it was fun to animate the thing, particularly the Thumper part, getting him to act the way I always wished I could on skates.
You're seeing a rabbit, anatomically beautifully drawn rabbit, and you're seeing a caricature of probably a kid that you knew next door. And you relate to it because of that. You relate to it because it looks like the next door neighbor or like your son or daughter or niece or nephew.
Flower! That's not a flower! He can call me a flower if he wants to.
They worked out the essence of Disney animation on Bambi that's continued to this day, which is animals who are caricatures of human beings and at the same time move and behave like animals. People got intoxicated with the vision of what animation could be, and the art of animation never was the same again.